Hey Texas voters, welcome to part 8. That's right, we are so close to being halfway through the 17 state constitutional amendments that will be up for our vote this November. Now, before I go any further, I just have something that I need to address. Not one soul made a comment about my dog's cameo appearance in a previous video. Now, he's a pretty tough dog. His interior doesn't match his exterior at all. But he was at least expecting a little recognition for his appearance. And, I'll just leave it at that. Let me give a quick little breakdown for anyone who's just joining the journey, and then we'll jump right into it. If you're new here, this is where we are breaking down these 17 state constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot this November. What I do is I go over the proposition, we cover the overview part of it, and then I pull up some more information for you to mull over. That way you feel like, or at least have a starting point of maybe doing your own research a little bit deeper, but at least feel a little more confident in the choices that you're going to make. Quick reminder. The deadline for registering to vote is October 6th, so it's a good idea to make sure your registration is up to date and that you are registered to vote. I have both of those links in my bio. Before I read it to you, this is another quick preface that this amendment would not change anything. This is just another amendment that would prohibit any future legislation. Let's dive in. Texas Proposition 8. Prohibit estate taxes and new taxes on estate transfers, inheritances, and gifts amendment. Texas Proposition 8, the Prohibit Taxes on a Descendant's Property or Estate Transfer Amendment. A yes vote supports amending the state constitution to prohibit the state legislature from imposing a tax on a descendant's property or the transfer of an estate, inheritance, legacy succession, or gift. A no vote opposes amending the state constitution to prohibit the state legislature from imposing a tax on a descendant's property or the transfer of an estate, inheritance, legacy, succession, or gift. Now for the overview. What would Proposition, that's supposed to be 8, what would Proposition 8 prohibit? The amendment would add a Section 26 to Article 8 of the state constitution to prohibit the Texas state legislature from levying a state tax on estate, inheritance, or death tax after an individual's death, imposing a state tax on the transfer of an estate, inheritance, legacy, succession, or gift from an individual, family estate, or trust to another individual, family, estate, or trust, including a generation skipping transfer, or increasing the rate of a transfer tax or expanding who it applies to, that is in effect of January 1st, 2025. This amendment would also add language stating that the prohibition would not apply to gifts of motor vehicles or property taxes based on the property's values. Here's the thing. Texas does not currently have or impose these taxes. At one point in the past, they did, but right now, they do not. So this amendment would again just prohibit future legislator from reimposing at some point these taxes. So here's a little bit of history. Texas has had an estate and inheritance tax in the past, but it no longer collects them. The state has never had a state-level gift tax, only adhering to federal gift tax regulations. The estate tax, which was known as the pickup tax, would collect a portion of the federal estate tax paid by large estates, based on a credit that was offered on federal returns. So they would collect a portion of the returns that the estate would get and base the tax rate off of that. The basis for this tax disappeared in 2005 when the federal government eliminated the state death tax credit, so they could no longer collect on that. And Texas did not create a new state-level estate tax to replace it. Texas had an inheritance tax that was paid by the beneficiaries on the assets they received from a deceased person's estates. So the ones who inherited that were the ones paying the tax. This tax was abolished effective September 1st, 2015. There has never been a state tax on gifts. Residents are only subject to federal gift tax regulations, including annual and lifetime exemptions, and no inheritance tax on gifts. For the same reason there's no inheritance tax, there is no Texas state tax on gifts or inheritances received from in-state residents. Now, as of 2025, there are only 5 states that have an inheritance tax, and there is no federal inheritance tax. Those 5 states are Kentucky, Maryland, Nebraska, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And a little food for thought, but Maryland is consistently one of the top 5 most wealthiest states in the country, oftentimes landing in the number 1 spot. Now, there are factors that determine who pays. Even in states with inheritance tax, many beneficiaries are exempt based on their relationship to the deceased. The closer the relationship, the more likely the beneficiary will be exempt or pay a lower tax rate. Spouses are exempt from inheritance tax in all states that impose it. Immediate family, such as children, parents, and grandchildren, are often exempt or subject to lower rates. More distant relatives and unrelated individuals typically face the highest tax rates. Now, who would benefit the most from prohibiting estate taxes and new taxes on estate transfers, inheritances, and gifts are primarily the wealthiest individuals. Now, we're going to look at the qualifications for those who do pay a federal estate tax. For a person who dies in 2025, their estate must file a federal estate tax return and may owe taxes only if the gross value of their assets, so everything that they own that is worth money and could be sold for a dollar amount, plus certain lifetime gifts, exceeds the $13.99 million exemption. The estate, not the heirs, so before it gets dispersed among family members, is responsible for paying this tax. For married couples, they get to double their exemption, so about $27.98 million can be passed tax-free to their heirs. Now here's a strange little detail. Non-residents who are not U.S. citizens only have an exemption of $60,000. So if you are a single person and your heart stops beating permanently, you can still have up to $13.99 million worth of assets before anything else would get taxed. And if you're married, that exemption doubles to $27.98 million worth of assets. So if you have $25 million worth of assets, there is no federal inheritance tax. And just out of curiosity, how many people do you know, heck, let's even count them as married, how many married people do you know that even have the $13.99 million worth of assets? And just so you know, they already have loopholes that they do use in order to avoid paying taxes on gifts. Individuals can gift up to $18,000 to any person each year without triggering federal gift taxes. Married couples can effectively double this exclusion by using gift splitting, allowing them to collectively gift up to $36,000 per recipient annually. And please take note that the one asset that you could argue a majority of people have access to and would be able to claim would be left out of the prohibition of these exemptions. So they are willing to leave that up for a future debate in legislation on whether or not they want to charge you a tax on gifting your car. So if you wanted to give it to your child or your family member, they could still potentially debate that, but there would be an exemption for all of these other things. They wouldn't even be able to talk about it. As a quick reminder, Texas does not currently have any of these taxes. There is no estate tax. There are no new taxes on estate transfers. There's no inheritance tax, and there is no gifts tax. This amendment would just block any future legislative session from discussing these. By the way, starting in January of 2026, that federal exemption is increasing both for the individual and the married couple. For the individual, it's going up from that $13.99 million exemption to a $15 million exemption, and for the couple, it's going up from the $27.98 million to a $30 million exemption. Here's the thing. Of all the sub-communities I've lived in within the community as a whole, this would not help any of those people that have been or were around me. My. If you have any comments, questions, want more details, or have more details, you know where to leave them. Let's keep this conversation going, because as much as you're learning, I'm learning too.